The story of Samson begins in a dark time for the children of Israel. For 40 long years, they had been under the crushing rule of the Philistines, a powerful and ruthless people who worshipped false gods. Israel's spirit was broken, their faith was weak, and they had no leader. In the small town of Zorah lived a man named Manoah and his wife. They were good people, but they carried a quiet sorrow. They didn't have any children, and his wife was barren. In their culture, this was a source of deep shame and a constant unanswered prayer. One day, as Manoah's wife was alone in a field, a radiant figure appeared before her. It was an angel of the Lord. The angel spoke, his words cutting through her years of grief. "You are barren and have no children," he said, "but you shall conceive and bear a son." The promise was breathtaking, almost too much to believe, but it came with strict instructions. The angel commanded her to drink no wine or strong drink and eat nothing unclean, because the child she carried would be special. He was to be a Nazirite, consecrated to God from birth until death. The Nazirite vow was a sacred commitment that involved 3 main rules: no products from the grapevine, no contact with the dead, and the most visible sign of all, never letting a razor touch his hair. His uncut hair would be the outward symbol of his devotion and the source of his God-given power. This child, the angel declared, had a huge destiny. He would be the one to begin to save Israel from the power of the Philistines. He was the spark of rebellion that God's people desperately needed. Overwhelmed, the woman ran to her husband. She described the man of God, whose appearance was like that of an angel, both terrifying and majestic. Manoah, full of faith and fear, prayed to God. "O Lord," he pleaded, "please let the man of God whom you sent come again to us and teach us what we are to do for the child who will be born." God heard his prayer. The angel appeared once more. Manoah rushed to the divine messenger and asked, "Are you the man who spoke to this woman?" "I am," the angel replied. The angel repeated the Nazirite rules, stressing the lifelong holiness required for the boy. Wanting to show hospitality, Manoah offered to prepare a goat for him, but the angel refused. "If you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord." In that moment, Manoah knew he wasn't talking to a mere prophet. "What is your name?" he asked, "so that we may honor you when your words come true." The angel's reply was mysterious. "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" So, Manoah sacrificed a goat on a rock to the Lord. As the flames leaped toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended into the sky within the flame. Manoah and his wife fell on their faces, trembling with reverence and fear. They had seen a messenger of God. "We shall surely die," Manoah cried, "for we have seen God." But his wife, filled with a new faith, reasoned with him. "If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted an offering from our hands, nor shown us all these things." Sure enough, the angel's promise was fulfilled. The woman bore a son, and they named him Samson. The boy grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him, hinting at the incredible power waiting to be unleashed on the enemies of Israel. As Samson grew up, it was clear he wasn't like anyone else. The Spirit of God gave him physical power that defied all human limits. But alongside this divine gift was a headstrong, impulsive nature. His first big decision as a man set the pattern for his whole life. A decision led by his eyes and his desires, not by the wisdom of his family or his God. On a trip into Philistine territory, Samson saw a young Philistine woman who captivated him. He went home and made a shocking demand. "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah," he announced. "Now get her for me as my wife." His parents were horrified. "Isn't there a woman among our own people? Must you take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" They pleaded. Marrying outside the faith was forbidden. But Samson wouldn't budge. "Get her for me," he insisted, "for she is right in my eyes." What his parents didn't know was that God was weaving this reckless decision into a much larger plan to bring judgment against the Philistines. So, Samson and his parents traveled to Timnah. As they neared the town's vineyards, a fierce young lion lunged at Samson. In that moment, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. With no weapon in his hand, he seized the beast and tore it apart with supernatural might, as easily as someone might tear a young goat. It was his first real taste of the divine power inside him. He didn't tell his parents what he'd done. He continued to Timnah, and the woman pleased him. Later, when he returned to marry her, he stopped to see the lion's carcass. Inside the skeleton, he found a swarm of bees and honeycomb. He scooped some out and ate it, even sharing it with his parents without telling them where he got it. The image stuck in his mind, sweetness coming from a ferocious beast. At the 7-day wedding feast, Samson, full of youthful arrogance, challenged 30 Philistine companions. "Let me tell you a riddle," he proposed. "If you solve it in 7 days, I'll give you 30 linen garments. But if you can't, you'll give me the same." The Philistines accepted. Samson smiled and posed his riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. For 3 days, the men were stumped. Their frustration turned to anger. On the 4th day, they went to Samson's new wife with a vicious threat. "Coax your husband into explaining the riddle," they snarled, "or we will burn you and your father's house down." Terrified, the woman went to Samson, using her tears as a weapon. "You only hate me. You don't love me," she cried. "You've posed a riddle to my people, but you haven't told me the answer." He resisted, saying, "I haven't even told my own parents. Why should I tell you?" But she kept crying and pleading for the rest of the feast. Finally, on the 7th day, worn down by her constant pressure, he gave in and told her the secret. She immediately told her people. Just before sunset, the Philistine men came to Samson with smug looks. "What is sweeter than honey?" they declared. "And what is stronger than a lion?" Samson knew instantly he'd been betrayed. A cold, righteous fury washed over him. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him again. He went to another Philistine city, Ashkelon, and in a rage struck down 30 of their men. He took their clothes and gave them to the men who'd solved the riddle, paying his debt in blood. Burning with anger, he abandoned the feast and his wife and went back to his father's house. After his anger cooled, Samson decided to return for his wife, but her father refused to let him see her. "I was sure you hated her," the man explained, "so I gave her to your companion. Her younger sister is more beautiful. Please take her instead." The insult was profound. His wife had been given to the very man who likely set up his humiliation. This was the final straw. "This time," Samson declared, "I will be blameless when I do them harm." His revenge was cunning and destructive. He went out and caught 300 foxes, tying them together in pairs by their tails. He fastened a torch between each pair, lit them, and released the terrified animals into the Philistines' grain fields. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the grain, vineyards, and olive groves, wiping out their primary sources of food and wealth. When the Philistines found out why, they sought their own brutal justice. They went and burned Samson's former wife and her father to death, the exact fate they had threatened her with. This savage act only fueled the violence. When Samson heard, he vowed revenge. "Since you have acted like this," he said, "I will surely take my revenge on you." He attacked them with a great slaughter, vicious and without restraint. After his rampage, Samson hid in a cleft of the rock at Etam. The Philistines gathered an army and marched into Judah, demanding Samson be handed over. The men of Judah, terrified, confronted their own champion. "Don't you know the Philistines rule over us?" they said. "What have you done to us?" Samson's reply was simple. "As they did to me, so I have done to them." But the men of Judah were there to preserve peace at any cost. "We have come to bind you and give you to the Philistines." In an act of deep betrayal, the champion of Israel was turned over by his own people. He agreed to be bound with 2 new ropes, but only if they swore not to kill him themselves. As they led their bound hero toward the waiting Philistines, the enemy shouted in triumph. But as they rushed forward, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson again. He snapped the ropes as if they were scorched threads. His bonds melted away. He looked around, and his eyes landed on a strange, humble weapon, the fresh jawbone of a donkey. He snatched it from the ground. It was an unclean object a Nazirite shouldn't touch, but it became an instrument of God's judgment. With the jawbone in hand, Samson became a whirlwind of destruction, killing 1,000 Philistine soldiers. Panting and victorious, he cried out, "With the jawbone of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men!" But after the great victory, he was overcome with thirst. His arrogance vanished, and he cried out to God for help. "You have granted this great salvation," he prayed, "and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised." God split open a hollow place, and water gushed out. Samson drank, and his spirit revived. It was a powerful reminder. His strength, his victories, and his very life came from the Lord. His fame now cemented, Samson went to the Philistine city of Gaza. His enemies learned he was there and lay in wait at the city gate, planning to kill him at dawn. But Samson rose at midnight, went to the massive city gate, and tore it from its foundations, posts, bar, and all. Heaving the entire gate onto his shoulders, he carried it for miles to the top of a hill facing Hebron. It was an act of breathtaking strength and pure mockery. For 20 years, Samson judged Israel, a one-man army holding their enemies at bay. For 2 decades, Samson was a legend. Yet, the very weakness that had nearly undone him before, his attraction to foreign women, wasn't gone. It was a fatal flaw, waiting for the right temptation. He fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek. Her name was Delilah, and her name would echo through history as a symbol of treachery. When the lords of the Philistines learned of Samson's infatuation, they saw their chance. They came to Delilah with a desperate proposition. "Entice him," they urged, "and find out where his great strength lies, so we may overpower him." The reward they offered was staggering: 1,100 shekels of silver from each of the 5 rulers. For this price, Delilah agreed to betray the man who loved her. She became a spy in her own home, hiding her greed behind a mask of affection. "Please tell me where your great strength lies," she asked him. her voice dripping with false intimacy. Samson, playing along, lied. "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, I'll become as weak as any other man." Delilah relayed the message. That night, with Philistine soldiers hiding in the room, she tied him up. Then she cried the alarm. "The Philistines are upon you, Samson!" He awoke and snapped the bowstrings with no effort. Delilah pretended to be hurt. "You've mocked me," she pouted. "Please tell me how you might be bound." Still enjoying the game, Samson offered a second lie. "If they bind me with new ropes that have never been used, then I'll become weak." So Delilah took new ropes, bound him, and shouted the warning again. And again, he broke the ropes from his arms like a thread. Delilah's frustration grew. "Until now you have mocked me," she said. "Tell me how you might be bound." This time, Samson's lie came dangerously close to the truth. "If you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom." It was the first time he'd ever mentioned his hair. Delilah wove his hair into her loom and once more cried, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." He awoke and ripped the entire loom out of the ground. The game was over. Delilah was furious. She stopped asking about his secret and started attacking his love for her. "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me?" she demanded. "You have mocked me 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies." Day after day she pressed him, nagging and pleading, giving him no peace. The Bible says his soul was vexed to death. Worn down by her relentless emotional siege, he finally surrendered. He broke. He poured out his heart and told her the whole truth. "A razor has never come upon my head," he confessed, "for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak, and be like any other man." He had just handed over the symbol of his sacred vow to his deadliest enemy. Delilah knew that this time he'd told her the truth. She sent a message to the Philistine lords. "Come up this once, for he has told me all his heart." They came, their silver clutched in their hands. That evening, Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap, a posture of ultimate trust. Then she called for a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. As the last lock was cut, his vow was broken. His strength began to leave him. She shook him awake with the terrible cry, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." He awoke, thinking, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know the most tragic truth of all. The Lord had departed from him. For the first time, he was truly alone and truly weak. The Philistines swarmed in and seized him. The man who was once unstoppable was now completely helpless. They inflicted a horrific symbolic punishment. They gouged out his eyes. The man so often led by his sight, who chose a wife because she was right in his eyes, was now in a world of permanent darkness. His fall was complete. They brought him down to Gaza, the city whose gates he had once carried away. There, they bound him with bronze shackles and forced him to grind grain in the prison. The champion of Israel was now doing the back-breaking work of an animal, a living trophy of the Philistines' victory. To his enemies, it was the ultimate triumph. Their god, Dagon, had delivered Samson into their hands. But in that dark prison, unseen by mocking eyes, something quiet was happening. Samson's hair, the symbol of his broken vow, had begun to grow back. To celebrate, the Philistine lords threw a massive festival in the temple of their god, Dagon. "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands," they proclaimed. The temple was packed, so crowded that another 3,000 men and women crammed onto the flat roof to get a look. Once the wine was flowing, they cried, "Bring out Samson, that he may entertain us." The broken champion was led out, guided by a boy, and placed between the two central pillars that supported the entire temple. The crowd erupted in jeers and laughter, but in that moment of ultimate humiliation, Samson was no longer the arrogant man he'd once been. The darkness and chains had burned away his pride. He leaned toward the boy. "Let me feel the pillars on which the temple rests, that I may lean against them." The boy guided his hands to the two massive columns. Then Samson prayed. It wasn't a boastful shout, but the desperate whispered prayer of a broken man turning to God one last time. "O Lord God," he said, "remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my two eyes." It was a personal plea, but also a profound act of faith, a belief that even now, God could and would answer. God heard his prayer. Samson placed his right hand on one pillar and his left hand on the other. He braced himself and shouted, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then, with a final surge of God-given strength, he pushed. A horrifying crack echoed through the temple. The pillars groaned, splintered, and gave way. The massive roof, weighed down with thousands of people, came crashing down. Stone, timber, and bodies collapsed in a single, catastrophic moment of destruction. The temple of Dagon became a tomb. Samson, the 5 lords of the Philistines, and every person inside were killed. The Bible notes a stunning fact. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. Later, his family came and retrieved his body from the rubble. They brought him home and buried him in the tomb of his father, Manoah. His tragic and heroic journey was over. Samson's story is one of the most powerful and tragic in the entire Bible. It's a story of immense, God-given potential, squandered by human weakness and unchecked desire. He was set apart for a holy purpose, yet often lived a life ruled by his passions rather than his calling. He's a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and the consequences of breaking our promises to God. But that's not where his story ends. It doesn't end in failure, it ends in redemption. In his final moments, a blind and broken Samson teaches us the most important lesson of all. True strength doesn't come from our own abilities. It's found when we are most dependent on God. It's when Samson is at his absolute weakest that God's power is shown most mightily. His life is a testament that God can work his will even through deeply flawed people to accomplish his purposes. Samson's life was a tragedy, but his death was a triumph of what God can do, even at the very end. If you found this story powerful, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more illustrated Bible stories. What lesson did you learn from the life of Samson? Let us know in the comments below.